Mr. Shulman, you have been the head of the IRS for over 5 years. You're in charge of the Internal Revenue Service, correct?
I was head of the IRS for 4 years and about 8 months.
All right, 4 years and 8 months. You get 132 letters from members of Congress concerned about targeting, and you send them to Leg Affairs to deal with. Did you feel any responsibility to go to the Cincinnati office and find out for yourself what was going on? Did you ever make a visit to the Cincinnati office?
I guess I don't accept the premise that I got 132 letters about targeting. I certainly wasn't aware of that number till now. I knew about 2 questions.
Well, regardless, when Congress contacts you, whether it's 12 senators or members of this committee, I mean, doesn't it alert you to the fact that, you know, maybe if there's smoke, maybe there's fire? So did you ever visit the Cincinnati office?
I visited early in my tenure the Cincinnati office, which has many different operations, but I don't believe I went to Cincinnati during this 2012 time.
Do you take responsibility for what happened in the Cincinnati office?
Do I take responsibility for the list?
Yes.
Being done? I don't take personal responsibility for there being a list with criteria put on it, but I do accept the fact that this did happen on my watch.
So you don't take responsibility, but you recognize the fact that it happened under your watch?
Look, I recognize that this happened on my watch, and I'm very sorry that this happened while I was at the Internal Revenue Service.
You know, one of the problems we have here is people are unwilling to take responsibility for actions that happen under their command. And you had a duty, as far as I'm concerned, to find out what was going on in the Cincinnati office when members of Congress, 132 of them or 50 of them or 10 of them, inform you that they think that there's some kind of targeting going on. And if that doesn't elevate your concern and interest, then something's fundamentally wrong between the way Congress interacts with the administration and the bureaucracy. Now, Mr. George, the law is that a 501c4 must operate exclusively for the social welfare. That's what the law says, correct?
That is my, yes, that's correct.
Exclusively for social welfare purposes.
Yes.
And somewhere along the line, the IRS came out with a regulation that reduced it to primarily. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
So does the regulation trump the statute?
Well, I'm not here to give legal advice. That is, as an attorney, that is my understanding, that a regulation does not trump a statute, but a regulation can be used to elaborate on the intent of the statute.
So if we just look at those 2 words, exclusively and primarily, there's a dramatic difference, correct?
Yes, in my view.
And if regulation can't trump statute, then everything that's been going on here relative to authorizing 501c4s, if they're not exclusively being used for social service purposes, is violative of the law, correct?
I would say yes, but we have to keep in mind there may have been court interpretations that between the passage of the legislation and the implementation of the passage of the statute and the implementation of the regulation. So, and I don't have the history of Congresswoman.
In your review of this situation, have you identified in Cincinnati the individuals who have developed this BOLO list?
We have not yet, ma'am.
And why not?
We have had some difficulty in terms of getting clarity from some of the IRS employees we've interviewed. Keep in mind, this is an audit. The people we have been interacting with were not under oath. And so if this matter develops further and changes its character, that might change the willingness of people to be more forthcoming with the information.
Now, the committee yesterday interviewed Holly Paz, who's the manager of the Ruling and Agreement Office in the Washington, D.C., and for at least part of the time period in question, she oversaw approximately 300 employees in the Cincinnati unit that determines whether organizations qualify for tax-exempt status. She said that she was the first person in Washington office to learn about the use of inappropriate criteria in June of 2011. Do you agree with that? Is that consistent with your report?
I have no information on that, but if you'll, I beg your indulgence for 1 minute.
The gentlelady's time has expired, but you can continue to answer.
We do not have any information on that, Congresswoman.
I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. We now go to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg. Would you give me just 2 seconds of yielding?
2 seconds, I certainly
For
would.
the gentlelady, my colleague from California, the Center for American Progress and Organize for American Action and others are 501c4s. This is not new. President Obama uses a 501c4.
Will the gentleman yield?
It's the gentleman's time.
I will yield briefly.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, regardless of whether it's a Democratic, a progressive, a conservative, or Republican organization, laws we have should be enforced. And a statute was trumped by a regulation. We should all be concerned about that. I yield back.
And if I can clarify for all of us, this change in 1959, there's a whole lot of water over the dam since 1959. And I think that it's important today to realize that without congressional action, trumping a 1959 by the IRS would be legislating without a doubt. And I think the IG, including it in his audit, told all of us essentially that the Ways and Means Committee has, in fact, a challenge to deal with, which is, do we really want it the way it is as it is evolved in use? But ultimately, the decision since 1959 has caused organizations that perhaps all of us have grown to like. The 501c3s, like the American Lung Association, endorses legislative initiatives, as you know, in California. They promote initiatives and so on. They do it as a minority of what they do. So I think one of the challenges for this committee, and I would only ask us all to think about it in this term, is Ways and Means has authority to change the law or to essentially trump a regulation.
I'd ask unanimous consent to have my full 5 minutes restored. I mean, it's been interesting listening to the accounts here of 118 visits to the White House by Mr. Shulman. No talk about this specific issue. No talk about related issues during those 118 visits. 132 letters coming from members of Congress, 42 articles in newspapers, and frankly, we just had the opportunity now of having the press really get engaged with it. But 42 over that course of time. I also look at a train of events. September 2010, Senate Finance Committee Chairman Baucus wrote a letter to the IRS asking the IRS to survey tax-exempt organizations to ensure that political campaign activity is not the organization's primary activity. October 2010, Senator Durbin wrote to the IRS to review the purposes and activities of several tax-exempt organizations. February 2012, Senators Bennett, Franken, Merkley, Schumer, Shaheen, Udall, and Whitehouse wrote to the IRS about the issue. 32 Democrats in March of 2012, 12 House Democrats wrote to the IRS and the White House to ask that political activity of tax-exempt organizations be investigated. July and August of 2012, Senator Levin sent letters to the IRS and said that the IRS appears to be passively standing by while organizations clearly ignore the tax code with no apparent consequences. Now, this to me seems like a significant amount of requests for information and concerns that private citizens, organizations seeking tax-exempt status who happen to be of the conservative side would be checked on and questioned. Now, I find it difficult, Mr. Wolin, to understand how that didn't come across your train of reference and responsibility earlier on. Did you ever discuss congressional interest in the way the IRS was handling political nonprofits with the President?
I did not, Congressman, never.
Did you ever discuss it with anyone at the White House or any agency outside the IRS?
I did not, Congressman.
Why didn't you discuss this when you knew it was of such interest to Congress, and you knew Congress was apparently not satisfied with whatever actions the agency had taken thus far on either side of the issue?
Frankly, Congressman, the correspondence to which you referred did not come to me. I think it was in general, as you suggested, addressed to the IRS, and I frankly was unaware of this, of the concern until...
But Treasury has intense responsibility and ought to have intense scrutiny over the IRS, correct?
Well, Congressman, I think it's important for me to reiterate that with respect to the details of tax administration and tax enforcement, it's been the longstanding practice of Treasury Departments spanning administrations of Republican and Democratic presidents not to get involved in those details, specifically because we don't want to have political influence over those kinds of detailed activities with respect to tax administration. I think this is a hearing and a subject matter that makes clear why that's not a good idea.
Not a good idea. Mr. Shulman, when did you learn about the second BOLO again and the failure of employees to follow explicit directions from their superiors?
About the fact that there was a BOLO and then a second BOLO and that employees hadn't followed directions?
Yes.
That I didn't learn about until this last week when the report came out.
Wow. Were you involved in any discussions about disciplining people who were being insubordinate in the Cincinnati office?
Not that I remember.
In Politico today, I see this headline here: heads won't roll at the IRS. Heads won't roll at the IRS. Labor rules give workers protection. The amount of ineptitude, and it's assuming that a Fifth Amendment was requested by Ms. Lerner, who's not here. Did you discipline some individuals at the IRS while you were commissioner?
Inappropriate conduct, not doing their job, those kinds of things.
Wow. And we missed all of this. I yield back.
I think, isn't it true that they began targeting Tea Party before there was any doubling, that your own testimony shows between 2009 and 2010 there was not a marked increase, and they began targeting with just one Tea Party application and then expanded it?
They did, yes, sir.
Thank you. I think that makes it clear. Oh, one more thing. There were 479 or so of these Tea Party groups that were targeted in total. Were there any BOLOs issued for progressive groups, liberal groups? Because I'm assuming that your investigation, we can't see them, but your investigation showed liberal groups that flew right through during the same time and got their 501c4s. They were not stopped. Isn't that correct?
Sir, this is a very important question. Please, I beg your indulgence.
Of course.
The only be on the lookout, that is BOLO, used to refer cases for political review were the ones that we described within our report. There were other BOLOs used for other purposes. For example, there were lookouts for indicators of known fraud schemes, so they could be referred to the group that handles those issues. For nationwide organizations, there were notes to refer state and local chapters to the same reviewers. As we continue our review of this matter, we have recently identified some other BOLOs that raise concerns about political factors. I can't get into more detail at this time as to the information that is there because it's still incomplete, that we've uncovered because it's still incomplete. And there are 6103 issues involved here, too.
So clearly it's fair to say, though, that there was a BOLO for Tea Party, but not a BOLO for Move On or Progressive.
I'm not in a position to give you a definitive response on that question at this time, Mr. Iser. Mr. Chairman.
So are you saying today that there were other 501c4s, not specific, so much as one other 501c4 not previously identified during your IG audit that were in fact targeted and held in a similar way?
I cannot give you a definitive answer, sir, at this time, but I certainly will.
I only ask if there's at least one. Are you aware of at least one that was targeted using a BOLO that was a 501c4 in which they were targeted politically but did not fall into this current report we have before us? I'm not asking for privileged information. I'm asking
no.
for one.
For the review, the purposes of the audit that we conducted, which was to determine whether they were looked for in the context of political campaign intervention, there were no others.
Thank you.